Hey there. Ready for a deep dive?
Always.
Okay, good. You guys sent in a ton of stuff about this final report from the Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah.
And wow, this thing,
It's a big one.
it's huge.
Crazy dance.
We're going to focus on, I think, some of the most intriguing aspects of it.
Right.
And those are like the origins of the pandemic, the potential involvement of some secret collaborators,
Ooh.
whether this whole lab leak thing is a conspiracy or not.
Right.
And then, of course, like, what are the report's bombshell conclusions?
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion, this pandemic.
Totally.
Every layer you peel back, there's more questions.
More questions and more complexity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just get right into it.
Okay.
Where did COVID-19 come from?
Right.
This is like the million-dollar question.
It is the question.
Right off the bat, the report kind of jumps right into this possibility of a lab leak. Which, a lot of people initially were like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory.
Right. Right. Initially, that was just kind of like a fringe idea,
Exactly.
And it was dismissed pretty quickly. And what's interesting is that the report challenges that dismissal.
Oh, interesting.
It brings up this scientific paper called The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2.
Okay.
Which was published really early on in the pandemic and really had a huge influence on how people saw the pandemic.
So this paper basically was like, no, it wasn't a lab leak.
Essentially, yeah. It kind of shut down that conversation for a while.
Interesting.
And so the report really scrutinizes this paper.
So what's wrong with this paper?
Well,
Did they get the science wrong?
the report doesn't necessarily say that the science was wrong, but it raises questions about potential biases, like how fast was this paper pushed through?
Okay.
And it looks into the authors, people like Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anderson, and digs into, what was the basis for their conclusions.
Got it.
And one of the things that is really contentious is this thing called the furin cleavage site in the virus.
Okay, stop.
Yeah.
Furin cleavage site.
Okay.
What is that?
So imagine the virus needs a key to unlock your cells, right?
Okay.
The furin cleavage site is like that key. And it's not something that's commonly found in similar viruses.
Oh, okay.
So when scientists saw this, some of them immediately thought, wait a minute, this looks like something that might have been engineered,
Oh.
like in a lab.
So some scientists were like, red flag, red flag.
Yeah, exactly.
But this paper basically was like, nah.
Right. And the report suggests that this dismissal might have been intentional, maybe to kind of
To squash it.
to squash any talk of a lab leak
Right.
and steer the narrative in a different direction.
Interesting.
And the report actually lays out a pretty compelling timeline that suggests there was a coordinated effort to shape public opinion
Wow.
about the pandemic's origins.
So if they were trying to squash this lab leak theory,
Yeah.
who benefits from that?
Well, the report points to some big players,
Yeah.
especially EcoHealth Alliance and their work with the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Okay, yeah.
They were doing research on bat coronaviruses, and this is where things get even more juicy. Exactly.
Okay, so EcoHealth Alliance, now they were getting funding from the NIH, our National Institutes of Health,
Right.
for this research, right?
Correct.
What exactly were they doing?
They were studying bat coronaviruses. But here's the thing.
Okay.
The report suggests that they might have been involved in what's called gain-of-function research.
Remind me what that is.
Oh, yeah, it's controversial.
Yeah.
It involves manipulating viruses,
Okay.
potentially making them more transmissible
Okay.
or more dangerous to us, to humans.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So they were like making viruses more dangerous.
Well, that's a big question.
Okay.
Right. And the report really digs into the specifics of their research, looking at whether they were doing these gain-of-function techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And it even raises concerns about potential violations of U.S. law and how this research was done.
So EcoHealth Alliance is doing this kind of risky research, funded by us, by taxpayers, and they might have been breaking the law.
Yeah, it sounds like a spy thriller.
It does.
Right.
It's getting really interesting.
And it gets even more complicated
Oh, no.
because the report says that EcoHealth may have actually obstructed the subcommittee's investigation.
Oh.
Like potentially doctoring documents and misleading Congress.
Doctor documents. What were they trying to hide?
That's what the report is trying to find out.
Yeah.
It's like, why go to such lengths if you've got nothing to hide, right?
Exactly.
So it really suggests that there's more to the story.
This is so juicy.
Right.
There's one other thing that I remember from this report, and it has to do with DARPA turning down EcoHealth's research proposal.
Oh, yeah. DARPA. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Yeah, and they're known for funding some pretty crazy stuff.
Cutting edge. controversial sometimes.
But they said no to this.
They did. They rejected it.
If DARPA, known for pushing the boundaries of science, was like, nope, too risky, well, what was so concerning about EcoHealth's research that even DARPA was like,
Well, the report suggests that DARPA had some serious concerns about the safety and the biosecurity of the research.
Okay.
Especially the potential for, like accidentally releasing a really dangerous virus.
Oh, wow.
So
we've got EcoHealth Alliance doing this research on bat coronaviruses.
Right.
Maybe using these gain-of-function techniques, getting money from the NIH.
Mm-hmm.
And then DARPA, who funds crazy research, says no to this because it's too risky.
Yeah.
It's like a puzzle where each piece just makes it more mysterious.
It really raises more questions than it answers. It makes you wonder why they were allowed to do this research at all, if there were such serious concerns about, the safety and the potential consequences. Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about the origins of this pandemic, the potential involvement of EcoHealth Alliance, and the attempts to suppress the lab leak theory. But this report goes beyond all of that.
Oh, yeah. It does. It goes way beyond that.
It really digs into the government's response to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it actually has some pretty harsh conclusions.
It doesn't hold back. It's very critical of how the pandemic was handled,
Right.
Both, the initial response and the long-term consequences.
Like what?
Well, they scrutinize everything.
Okay.
The WHO's investigation,
Okay.
the way the U.S. government handled school closures,
Okay.
vaccine mandates, you name it.
Okay, so speaking of schools, the report have a whole section about teachers' unions.
Yes.
Specifically, the American Federation of Teachers.
Right.
And their influence on school reopening guidelines.
Yeah, that was a huge issue for a lot of parents.
A lot of parents. Yeah.
Right, including me. And the report suggests that the AFT might have prioritized their own interests over the students. Yeah, advocating for these stricter guidelines that maybe delayed kids going back to school.
Wow.
And so it raises concerns about what that did to the kids in the long run, academically, their mental health. It was a big deal.
I think all parents remember that time of being like, I don't understand.
The uncertainty was...
The uncertainty, yeah.
Yeah.
It felt like they were making these decisions without even thinking about kids and families.
And the report, it kind of echoes that, saying that these policies really had this uneven impact, especially on vulnerable groups, kids, low-income communities. It was tough.
So the report is basically saying that, the government was trying, but a lot of times it had unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
It also points to these potential flaws in oversight,
Okay.
Like alleging that there might have been fraud within relief programs.
Oh, wow.
And that some officials were more worried about politics than public health. Yeah, and they even talk about how New York, under Governor Cuomo...
Yes, I remember this. This was a big...
Yeah, misrepresented data about COVID deaths in nursing homes.
It was like they were trying to downplay...
Exactly.
...the impact of their decisions.
Yeah, and sending those COVID-positive patients back into those facilities, it was really disturbing. If true, it shows a real lack of transparency and accountability.
Yeah, it's like they were protecting themselves more than the people.
Right, and that lack of transparency, that's a big theme.
Yeah.
Throughout this whole report, it really raises concerns about potential obstruction of justice.
Wow.
And attempts to just cover up information.
So, we talked about EcoHealth Alliance, maybe doctoring documents.
Yeah.
But was it just them? Or is there something more widespread?
It might have gone beyond EcoHealth.
Really?
Yeah. The report says that the Biden administration's Department of Health and Human Services might have actually obstructed the investigation.
No way.
Yeah, by withholding documents, redacting information.
So the government was actively trying to hide stuff from us about this pandemic.
That's what the report suggests.
That's crazy.
It also says that some officials might have intentionally deleted emails or used personal accounts to avoid Freedom of Information Act requests.
Yeah.
It's pretty serious.
It is. That's a big breach of trust.
Yeah, people have a right to know what happened.
Right.
Especially if mistakes were made, right?
Yeah. We should be able to learn from this.
Exactly. And this lack of transparency, it has these long-term consequences,
Like what?
It makes people distrust the government.
Okay.
It breeds conspiracy theories.
Makes sense.
It makes it harder to have honest conversations about the pandemic.
Okay, so we've talked about where this thing came from.
Yeah.
The potential involvement of these secret collaborators.
Right.
The suppression of that lab leak theory. And this flawed response by the government.
Yeah.
But this report also spends a ton of time on the issue of vaccines.
Yes, the vaccines. Huge topic, right?
Huge.
It goes into the development, the approval, the rollout, acknowledges how fast they were produced,
Yeah.
but also raises questions about were there any shortcuts?
Okay.
Like their political pressure.
I remember when the vaccines were first coming out,
Yeah.
I was so hopeful, but also just nervous.
The uncertainty, right.
Yeah.
And the report addresses those uncertainties head on.
Okay.
You know, it looks at the whole debate around booster shots.
Yeah.
Were they really necessary for everyone?
Right.
And it suggests that the Biden administration might have pushed for authorization too soon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about the mandates?
Oh, yeah, the mandates. Big controversy, right.
Huge.
And the report gets into the ethics of it all.
Okay.
You know, what are the unintended consequences? What does it do to our trust in public health officials?
I always felt like it should be up to me and my doctor.
A personal decision, right?
Yeah.
Not the government.
And the report seems to agree with that.
It really emphasizes individual autonomy and informed consent, especially when it comes to medical decisions.
That's great. What about the people who had reactions to the vaccine,
Right.
like adverse events? Does the report say anything about that?
It does. It raises concerns about the systems we have to monitor and compensate for potential vaccine injuries.
Okay.
You know, suggesting that maybe they're not equipped to handle the sheer number of claims.
Right.
Or address the concerns of people who believe they were harmed.
Yeah. It feels like we need to be more open and honest about vaccines.
I agree.
Talk about the benefits
Uh-huh.
and the risks,
Yeah.
even if they're rare.
Right. We need an open conversation based on science, not politics or misinformation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it feels like this pandemic really just shook people's trust in institutions, from the government to public health agencies to even scientists.
You're right. And the report highlights how damaging that is, that loss of trust. It affects our ability to handle future crises.
So how do we rebuild that trust?
Well, the report says transparency and accountability are key,
Okay.
and it calls for reforms. Better oversight of government programs, stronger vaccine safety systems,
Makes sense.
decisions based on science, not politics.
Science, not politics. I love that.
Right.
Yeah. It also talks about the importance of scientific debate.
Oh, absolutely. Allowing different viewpoints, encouraging people to really examine the evidence.
Even if it challenges what everyone thinks.
Exactly. If we want to be resilient as a society,
Yeah.
to face future challenges, we need open inquiry, critical thinking.
I love that. One of the things that really hit me in the report was the impact of the pandemic on the doctor-patient relationship.
Oh, that's important. It often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
But the report really acknowledges it as fundamental to ethical medical practice.
Right.
You know, trust, informed consent, a patient-centered approach.
It's like the pandemic just kind of pushed that aside.
Yeah, all those policies, especially about vaccines and mandates, it undermined that relationship. It felt like individual concerns just didn't matter.
Yeah.
It was one size fits all.
The report actually says something about emergency use authorizations.
Yes, for the COVID-19 vaccines.
And how that may have impacted informed consent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they didn't necessarily require the same level of informed consent as fully approved drugs.
Right. And it felt like everyone had to get vaccinated so quickly that our right to make our own decisions.
Yeah, with our doctors.
Yeah. Got lost.
It did.
And the report actually criticizes the mandates for not considering natural immunity.
Oh, yeah. Big point.
Like if you'd already had COVID,
Right.
you should have been treated differently.
Exactly. They didn't even consider that.
It's like we forgot that medicine should be about treating each individual patient.
Right. Not just following rules blindly.
Yeah. And the report says that these mandates, although maybe they were well-intentioned, just eroded trust and caused division.
Yeah, that's the irony. They wanted unity, but they got the opposite.
So where do we go from here? What have we learned?
Well, the report has some suggestions, but it's really up to us.
Okay.
We need to demand better from our leaders and institutions. Hold them accountable for transparency, for making decisions based on science,
Okay.
and for respecting individual rights.
It feels like this was such a collective trauma.
It was.
We're still dealing with it,
We are.
but maybe this could actually be an opportunity to make things better.
I hope so. This report is a wake-up call.
Yeah.
It shows what happens when trust breaks down,
Yeah.
when science becomes political,
Yeah.
when we forget individual rights. But it also gives us a way forward,
Okay.
a path to a better future,
I like that.
where we prioritize those things: transparency, accountability, and the well-being of everyone.
I think that's a great place to leave it for now. We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were talking about vaccines. And I remember at the time, I felt very much like, okay, well, I want to talk to my doctor about this. I want to, know what's best for me.
Right.
But it felt like a lot of people were having really adverse reactions to these vaccines.
Right.
And it wasn't being talked about.
Yeah.
And the report talks about, how we monitor and compensate people for potential vaccine injuries.
Yeah, the system's in place.
And it suggests that maybe these systems aren't good enough.
Right. Maybe they weren't really prepared for the volume of claims or, to address those concerns from people who felt like, hey, something happened to me.
Right, exactly. And I think, we have to be able to talk about this stuff.
We do.
Openly and honestly.
Yeah, an open conversation about vaccines.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the benefits.
Yeah.
And the risks. And we need to base that on solid science.
Not politics.
Right, not politics, not misinformation.
Exactly. I think it's also important to acknowledge, the impact this whole thing has had on, our trust in institutions.
Huge impact. Trust in government, public health agencies, even scientists.
Yeah, and the report actually highlights that, how harmful that is.
Yeah, it really is. You lose that trust.
Yeah.
It's hard to get back, and it makes it really tough to respond to these kinds of crises in the future.
Exactly. So, okay, what can we do? How do we rebuild that trust?
Well, the report has some ideas. It really emphasizes transparency and accountability as being key.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's calling for reforms, like better oversight of these government programs, stronger systems for vaccine safety, and making sure decisions are based on science.
Yeah.
Not politics.
I love that. Science, not politics.
Right.
Yes.
And it also talks about the importance of open debate in the scientific community.
Oh, I love that.
Right, allowing for dissenting voices, encouraging people to scrutinize the evidence.
Yeah, even if it goes against, what everybody thinks.
Exactly, because if we want to be a resilient society able to deal with these kinds of things in the future, we need to encourage people to think critically, to ask questions.
I love that. One of the things that really struck me in this report was what it said about the doctor-patient relationship.
Oh, yeah, that's so important, and it often gets overlooked in these discussions.
Yeah.
But the report really acknowledges it as being essential to ethical medical practice.
Yeah.
It's all about that trust between doctor and patient, informed consent, really putting the patient at the center.
And it feels like a lot of those policies during the pandemic, like the mandates, they kind of just steamrolled right over that relationship.
Yeah, it's like they were saying individual concerns didn't matter as much as just following the rules.
Exactly. Everyone had to do the same thing.
Yeah, it was one size fits all.
And the report actually talks about those emergency use authorizations.
Right, for the vaccine.
And how that might have affected informed consent.
Exactly, because those EUAs, they didn't require the same level of informed consent as a fully approved drug.
Yeah, right. And it felt like there's this rush to get everyone vaccinated as quickly as possible. And it's like, what about our right to make those decisions with our doctors?
Right. It was a very top-down approach. And the report also criticizes the lack of consideration for natural immunity in these mandates.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
Right. It's like if you already had COVID and developed natural immunity, you should have been treated differently, but that nuance was lost.
Totally.
And that's a problem.
Yeah. I thought medicine was supposed to be about treating each individual person, not just applying the same rules to everyone.
Exactly. And the report argues that these mandates, although they were probably well-intentioned, they ended up hurting more than they helped.
How so?
Well, they eroded trust in public health authorities and created a lot of unnecessary division and conflict in society.
Yeah, I remember that. So where do we go from here? What can we learn from all of this?
Well, the report offers some recommendations, but ultimately it's up to all of us to demand better from our leaders and institutions. We have to hold them accountable. For transparency, for basing their decisions on sound science, and for respecting individual rights and freedoms.
It feels like we've all been through a collective trauma.
Yeah, we have.
We're still dealing with the fallout.
We are.
But I think maybe, just maybe, we can use this experience as a catalyst for positive change.
I hope so. This report is a stark reminder of what can happen when trust breaks down, when science gets politicized, and when individual rights are ignored. But it also gives us a roadmap for a better future.
Okay.
One where we prioritize transparency, accountability, and the well-being of all.
I think that's a great point. This deep dive into the Select Subcommittee's report has been really eye-opening, to say the least. It shows that this pandemic wasn't just a public health crisis, it was a societal crisis.
Absolutely. It exposed these deep flaws in our systems and our way of thinking.
And while there's no easy fix, I think the first step is acknowledging those flaws and having honest conversations about what went wrong and how we can do better next time.
Exactly. We need to learn from our mistakes.
Right. To everyone listening, this report is a call to action. Be informed, stay engaged, and be part of the solution. Demand better from your leaders, from your institutions, and from yourselves. The future depends on it.
Well said. Let's use this experience to create a more resilient, more just, and more informed future.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep those questions coming. We'll be back with more insightful explorations soon. Welcome back to the deep dive.
So before the break, we were talking about, those vaccine mandates.
Right.
And how they might have kind of ignored natural immunity.
Exactly, yeah. Like, if you already had COVID
Yeah.
and had some protection from that, it seems like they didn't really take that into account.
Yeah, and it feels like medicine should be about treating the individual patient.
Absolutely. Personalized care.
You're
Not just like, here are the rules, everybody follow them.
right. One size fits all doesn't always work.
No, it doesn't. And the report actually argues that those mandates, even if they were meant well,
Yeah.
they probably caused more harm than good.
Yeah, I think they did. They eroded trust in public health officials.
Right.
Created a lot of division and conflict.
Yeah. So, okay, big question. Like, where do we go from here?
Right. What have we learned from all of this?
Yeah.
Well, the report has some recommendations, but I think it really comes down to us.
Okay.
We need to demand better from our leaders, from our institutions.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, we need to hold them accountable for transparency, for making sure that their decisions are based on sound science and for respecting our rights and freedoms.
Okay, those are all really good points. This whole pandemic, it feels like a collective trauma.
It really does.
Like we're all still kind of reeling from it.
Yeah, we're still processing it all.
But maybe this could be a turning point. Like maybe we can learn from this and make things better.
I hope so. I think this report is a wake-up call. It shows us what happens when we lose trust in each other, when science becomes politicized, when individual rights are ignored. But it also shows us a way forward,
Yeah,
a way to build a better future,
I like that.
where we focus on those things: transparency, accountability, and taking care of everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to kind of wrap things up. This deep dive into this report, it's been really, really eye-opening.
It has.
It shows us that this pandemic, it wasn't just a health crisis.
Right.
It was a crisis for, like, our whole society.
Absolutely. It revealed some really deep flaws in our systems and, I think, in our thinking.
Yeah, and, there's no quick fix.
No, there isn't.
But I think the first step is, like, just admitting that we messed up, that things went wrong, and then figuring out how to do better next time.
Exactly. We need to learn from our mistakes, be honest with ourselves.
Right, so to everyone listening out there, this report, it's a call to action. Stay informed, stay engaged, and be part of the solution. We have to demand better from our leaders, from our institutions, and, yeah, even from ourselves. The future depends on it.
Well said. Let's take this experience and use it to build a more resilient, more just, and more informed future.
I love that. That is a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those questions coming, and we'll be back soon with more insightful explorations. Bye, everybody.